오야, 마주는 기타다니 비심제 탐지기 된도 돕자라나메 봐 양다바 조베 산지기 고마름 부지 지내자 토바라차 디체도 담비 취에서 뭐 세님비 꾸룬 끈주게 리바나 리바 세답데 시셈바슈 다 강셈바치베 담비 취디 다 장주 람비 준비 낭제게 되니 하동 지미 거기로와 아니 동관이게 따와기 가자 우여숭아 우여 다랑로기로와 가정에서 응용이 다 뒤나라 수점을 하되 조디니만 모든 슈빈스.
Please cultivate the motivation to be able to do whatever it takes to achieve the most precious and supreme state of complete and perfect Buddhahood in order to benefit all mother sentient beings who are infinite, like space, and limitless, and generate the stages of motivation to listen to the Dharma teaching. What is the precious Dharma that we're listening to today and discussing? It's within the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, the Zhangchup Lamrim Chenmo. And within that, we're in the section called the Tong Chenmo, the great insight section. And the great insight, then there's identification of the object to be negated. And then a subsection of that is where we are continuing, that we haven't finished yet, is the actual identification of the object to be negated by the Madhyamikas.
오야, 다 같은 데 수점들이니만 디그 라원 메바데 테나 다니 여마힌 시비 시비 시제비 제발레스 다된다 테나 디나스 강랑킹 당 랑신당 라왕당 신라 라말레바 니바 텔라니 셰 대다 남자수 수바 따로 쓴다 어디 가스나 가진 다 쉬어나시 최놈 도지기 로 도비왕기 파다점 마인바 아니 유랑게 들롱은에 두바지요나 아니 디타바타숭 가자 두그레스 어디 셰제들라와 아니 가스나 딘데와디 어디 타바타숭기 드니 가자디 간지 샤스나 로 도지기 타니기 도베 파다점 지당 최점지 디 파다점 임발라 안 파다점 마이바 유랑게 들롱은에 두바지 어디 딘데지 요한디 요마르데 이내양랑 줄라 가두이나 디 진데고 디 낭데고 낭신이가 요게 다 딘데베 짐발로 디게 치달 셴비 아니 루와 두루군이 두바지 요나 아니 딘다디 토뉴도 리비 가자 세디 임바디 아니 시갸바 나라와 시갸비 짜와 나라 디군 라와 메바데 테나 당니 요마인 스니라 인다디 시갸비 짜와 나라와 어디 순간 시잡이 싸와디기 디기 고랑 차장지 책디 제와 있나 강라 떼네 중요봐 디니 라마 미주데스 디그 라마 메바데 테나다니 요마인 세기다 시잡이 싸와디체 디기 제와 아니 지 가스나 빠네 다와 차바기 제조디 나라다 틴다캅스 보이시 람림 나라 숭한 나싱스 아니 디나 강랑기 우다 랑신다 라왕 신라 라마레바 니바 텔라니 셰 대다 남자 숭 스타 각자디라와 각자디 다딘다 시자보 코로나라 아니 땡중이나 라왕도 주바 용어 말이스 다 지난게 최근 라왕도 매바 인상 테나 당이 요마인 세데다 임비 군zen다라 아니 땡중이 비 군zen기와 땡중 다티 땡중들라 다 땡중 차라몽부 순거래 다 급디 나라 강라 땡이 중요바 세 땡중데 다 땡중 참용도 신네와 강라 땡이 중요바 텔나 라왕 기니 라왕 미주로스 와 디그 라왕 메바데 테나 당이 요마인 스노다 땡중 세데다 텐다 땡중 지당 땡중들라와 다 시잡이 짜와코나 강라 땡이 중요바 땡이 라왕 미주로스 땡중데 다 숨라 야마 깨지신으로와 땡중 차라 숨신으로와 지당 땡중들라 차라 숨 요바나니 갑디 땡중 참모 와 민대 샤점비 땡제 와 민대 샤점비 뛰니 주비 땡제 오다 민장 따유점비 땡제 세디 다 탄주 투모만비 땡제 땡제 차쇼들이 와 오다 디 주다 보면 외숨 두고 말 인주산이 겐다와 민장 따유점비 땡제 인비 윤zen기 랑왕게 주비 랑신디 요 말레스 다 딘데베 랑왕 주베 랑왕 나와 랑싱게 딘데베와 민장 나와 따유 점만 와 도지 로 탄이게 파다 점네 떼바 마이비 투모메비 들롱은 주바지 tindewa rawang di meba di tini dag me se dag dewa di tindeji kan rishi jagore sin digu rawang meba di tena dani yoma in se di oda tindewe dag ninda di rawang we dag me se dag di ta namgyu duda umi kapsurwa rangja tubi zeyo ki dag di meba che kap di katsana lo dokche ki tani ki tokbe parda tsam yinba la ti mayi bi ani yu kyangbe wone druba jik yu na 텐다와디 가자 참모 되니 가스나 티체 다 텐다와디라 아니 반년 다와 잡히게 되니 로와 시잡이 제바디나라 아니 랑기무세 직체 랑싱기 주바 직체 라왕기 주바치 셀라 랑만레바 니바 텔라니 스니 다 민기 남다 시송도와 된다디 tinzor 가자디라로와 랑기무 니기 마주바 랑싱기 마주바 rawangi maduba shela rang maliba oda dukshin maduba yimbala rangi ngo nigi duba rawa rangshingi duba rawangi duba shela rang maliba sudu yoba utunzo ani kapdi kakja re se kakja di ani mingjang tayo tsamgi tende yimba kangshila tim mayimbi dokjigi lo tanyigi tokwa tsam mayimbi yu dulunguni duba jigi yona oda tende we rawangi dubi rangshin ranguni dubi rangshin 아니 셀라 마두비 장신 오다 틴디지 죽으래 소다디 인다디 가스나 디갑스 내가 치쇼 조지다 인다디 sabject 가리래 우마비 가자 랑루 가자 우유송와 소다 가자 디 조어디다 디가니와 오다 디시 자고레스다 디간주 고츠고에 다 삼로 고알립도베디 탑시 강요 중도다 디간을 셔오레스 그래서 돈이 라야디 강기 똥이 각자 딩메마스나 똥이 고메 그래요 말이와 그래서 강기 똥이 가자디 어디 디갑수베 내가 침무신 람린 침무는 송도와 어디 디 로라 샤드베디 아니 내가 침무슈지레스
So we'll start where we left off from the previous class, continuing and repeating one of the sections that we quickly went through. So this is page 212, and it's about halfway down the page. The referent object, so it's in the middle of this paragraph with the reply. The referent object that is thus apprehended by that ignorant conception, the independent ontological status of those phenomena, is identified as a hypothetical self or intrinsic nature. For Arya Davis, 400 stanzas says, all of this is without its own power. Therefore, there is no self. Commenting on this, Chandakirti's commentary on the 400 stanzas says, it is that which exists essentially, intrinsically, autonomously, and without depending on another. Thus, he says that those are synonyms. So here we're talking again about the object to be negated, and this is looking at several ways of describing or speaking about the object to be negated. These are, as it says here, synonyms. So we can talk about the things existing without being dependent on, or sorry, without being merely designated by a designating mind. We can talk about things existing by from their own side, being established from their own side. And so this is when we talk about the object to be negated, it's a hypothetical. So as it says above, where did it say that was I think a previous, oh yeah, right there, right? It's is identified as a hypothetical self or intrinsic nature. So it's a hypothetical because it's, in reality, all phenomena actually do exist by being merely labeled by the conceptual mind, being merely designated by a mind. And so, but if we were to think if things did exist in this way of being established from their own side without being posited or designated by a mind, then that's what becomes the object to be negated, if that thing did exist. But since it doesn't, then we're saying it's a hypothetical. It's only a hypothetical because it doesn't exist. In reality, all phenomena are merely designated by a mind without existing from their own side. And so, but the problem is, all the time, us ordinary beings, we are cognizing or apprehending phenomena as if they did exist in this impossible way, in this way of being established from their own side. And so now we have a quote here from the 400, as well as the commentary from Chandakirti on this quote. So all of this is without its own power. Therefore, there is no self. So there, because there's without its own power, we could say without independence, meaning all phenomena, all phenomena without independence are without independence. Therefore, there is no self. So the object to be negated, it doesn't exist, but we still hypothetically are thinking, identifying it. That's the main purpose of this section, identifying the object to be negated. And so the commentary by Chandakirti, again talking about this object to be negated, is saying it is that which exists essentially, intrinsically, autonomously, and without depending on another. And these are thus different synonyms. There are 4 different synonyms that are listed here. Essentially, so we could just say, kind of, really pointing out the object of negation a little more, what to say, just really focusing on, what is like the thing, the object negated. So an essence, okay, a nature. So that's intrinsically here. We could also just render into English as nature, as you've heard if you've come to classes before. So an essence, a nature, independence, and without depending, okay, on others. So that's those 4 are synonyms. And so then why don't these exist, and why is it not true? Because of the, let's see, where's the next? Well, it's so the term doesn't appear right here. So, but it's because things are dependently arisen, right? They're contingent and emergent, or dependently arisen. And so because of that, then they then, if something is dependently arisen, then it's necessarily not dependent on others. It's necessarily not independent of others. So it has to be relying on others, or dependent on others. And so that's why he's saying here, all of this is without independence, and therefore there is no self. And this, when we talk about now and so again, without its own power here is really saying, right, without an independence, so that it's, saying it's not relying on others. And so when we talk about not relying on others, as it says, the next line, without depending on another does not mean not depending does not mean not depending on causes and conditions. Instead, other refers to a subject. So again, I didn't read that part, but just he did mention that that's when we're talking about here dependent arising and emergence, we're talking about the subtlest type of that. So there are 3 levels or degrees of subtlety, some the coarser and subtler. So the last one here is the subtlest one we're talking about, which is what, again, being merely designated by terms or names, being merely designated by names, and being a mere name that is just a designation, a mere name that is just a designation. And so by that reason, because of that reason, that things are a mere name and just designations, then they are not independent. They're not with their own power. And so another way of saying, so we're giving various ways of thinking about or describing this object to be negated, which is, again, described with those 4 synonyms: nature, essence, independence, without depending on others. And another way of talking about that, another way of stating that, is it's something existing with its a way of abiding that is its own uncommon way of abiding. It's a self that abides with its own uncommon or own unique way of abiding. So we're saying that self doesn't exist. That self doesn't exist. Now, in the lower schools of Buddhist philosophy, the lower paradigms of Buddhist philosophy, then they do understand that there is no self that is self-sufficient and substantially existent, but they don't go to this degree of subtlety where they refute the self that has its own unique and uncommon way of abiding, or a way of kind of staying in existence, or its own uncommon state of staying in existence. So only the Prasangika Madhyamika are refuting that. Okay, and so this is, again, what is it then? It's that the phenomena, things, they exist by being merely designated over there, being merely labeled over there by a designating mind, by a designating mind. And this is Chandakirti using these different synonyms to refer to that here. And so this is then the most important point in this section here. What it's extremely important to understand this, to have it really appear clear to your mind. What is this object to be negated? And so that's, again, this whole section we're in, identifying the object to be negated by the actual identification of the object to be negated by the Madhyamikas. This is right here, the main point. Okay, so this is what you have to really get it clear in your thoughts and think about it well, so that you can understand when we say emptiness, when we're talking about this important concept of emptiness. Well, what is being negated by emptiness? What is it that emptiness negates? Empty of what? So it's really important to think about this and get it clear in your mind.
Kela shenla rao maleba sheba ni yujen la rao maleba mayinjis. Yujen tanyebe sheba shen she chadis. Ki wangi shaba mimbe shela rao maleba us. Tadinda yagi ani shijabi dewa nala da kyunjimigi namda shizu sungda ti nala ani karire. Rangi ngu rangshin rawang shela rao maleba shiduwa o ti ada demba duna 가자로 왔다 가자디 유나 동반이기 가자디 계시 요아이나 랑이 오도 봐 주요고게 랑싱기 주바 요고게 왕도 봐 셀라 라말로 요아 셀라 라말레바 세디 아니 셀라 라말레바 세디다 유겐 셀라 라말레바 세 셰단치 다시라 나티니 라말레바 세지 오다 도지기 또발라 라말레바 세 숨나니 갑디기 티니 셀라 마르 라말레바 유겐 라말레바 당 신달라 시기 말레스 독재기 유인과 유진 로 타니바 오바 독재저와 오다 딜라 라말리 비추기 요나 아니 덴바투바 당신투바 랑원투바레 오다 디케제 시인데 아 인다디 텐제 참문도 시제가 다디 되고 텐제 참으로와 텐제 참으로와 텐제 참으로시디 아니 민장 따위 점기 텐제 세저와 독재기 똑바 점기 샤비 텐제 세저와 아 독재 로 똑베 파다 점기 되니 샤비 텐제에서 오다 디 텐제디 텐제 참으 오다 최당제 독재기 똑바 점기 파다 점 샤바 이발라 디 샤발라 마드비 유수지나 아니 셀라 라말리 비수 요바 세 가자 참으기 아니 셀라 라말리 유수디 디레스 오다 독신소도 스타티가도.
So now going back to the next line, which is in the paragraph. Without depending on another does not mean not depending on causes and conditions. Instead, other refers to a subject, i.e. a conventional consciousness. And something is said not to depend on another due to not being posited through the force of that conventional consciousness. So these four different synonyms that Chandakirti in his commentary on Aryadeva's 400 stanzas lists, something's essence, its nature, its independence without depending on another. So those all are things that if phenomena were established truly, if phenomena if there was true establishment, if there were true establishment, those four would all exist. So again, those are the objects negated by emptiness, the object of the view of emptiness. It's negating those four, but they all would exist if there were true existence or establishment. Okay, so then the next line talking about without depending on another does not mean not depending on causes and conditions. So because phenomena depend on others, then those four don't exist. Phenomena are not truly established. Okay, but what does it mean to depend on others? Well, we're not saying, so there are three types or ways of depending on others. These are, again, the three levels of dependent arising, three levels of subtlety of that. So this is, again, separate, just as a note, separate from the 12 links of dependent arising. Here we're just talking in more, well, anyway, it's a different way of talking about it. So these are three different levels of subtlety of dependent arising. And so then there's dependence on causes and conditions, dependence on a basis of designation, and dependence on the designating mind. And so here we're talking about this third type. That's the subtlest type, the dependence on others being the designating mind. Okay, and so that's what we say when we're saying relying on others or depending on others or another. And so this is subtle dependent arising. And so it's saying again that because phenomena, they're depending on a mind that is merely labeling over there. Okay, so a conceptual mind that is merely labeling the object over there. And that is the subtle object to be negated.
오직이 로 타니기 똑배원게 샤발라 마데베 두주지 유나 셀라 라말수 유와 라로다 틴제지 유나 아니 라마와 자기레스 테나 라마와 시차데스 가스나 유로 도직이 타니라 마데베 랑게 투모만 비들로오네 두바지 유나 아니 라마와 쓰기제 스타트나 디 갈스니 제시 자와르스나 다 보면 라마와 메스고라 강사 라마와 메스기 라마와 지당 인다 디 랑싱당 랑윤당 셀라마들 오티 남기 라왕와디 때스 민자와지 이 라왕와디 차와니 바디 투모만 비 누르고는 봐 투모만 봤을 때 도지기 로타니기 파다점 마데비 아니 투모만 비 누르고는 두바지 유나 아니 라왕무트도 요와서 오다 디 유나 아니 각자 참여 라왕와디 레스 오다 진데지 유나 디네 디라 원이기 두바야 쓰기래 랑싱기 두바야 쓰기래 오다 랑싱기 두바세나레 랑기 원이기 두바스나레 라왕무 두바세데 둔다도도 가리레스나 라니 도제 추 강다 강 랑랑 도제기 탄니기 똑배 파다점이 라 마드비 아니 도 요수지요나 아니 투모만 비들롱은 두바서 다 투모만 비들롱은 두바디라 라왕무 있으니 타고래 랑이 원이기 두바양 쓰기래 랑싱기 두바양서 오다 딜라디 셰차우 소다 두 제도 아니 각자 투모광라 레스와 어디 다 두다서 오미 무슨 첸마 되게와 아니 각자 참무 다 돈이 참무 다 된다디와 앞에나 랑규베야 되니지 다음에 랑규베야 되니 가스나지 강사라왕와 메스 루딜라야 강사라왕와 메스 나 라왕바 민직 바르데 라왕와스 민다와 차소와 마게 강사라왕와 메스데 풍불라 마두비 라왕와 쓰고 다 디값수 강사라왕와 메 추 강양 라왕와 메세 라왕와디 아니 라니 도지기 탄니기 똑바라 마두비 뮤즈디 요마리 스드라와 마스디 도지기 탄니라 뛰는 주바리 투모비 도지기 탄니라 마두비 유즈지 요마리 세디는 정말 네 스디시디 어디니지 간인데
Then the next paragraph here. Therefore, autonomously refers to the nature of an object that has its own unique ontological status or manner of being. It is just this that is called essence or intrinsic nature. These four synonyms listed by Chandakirti again. So here it's this translation lists them as adverbs, just the linguistic form, but we could also list them just as nouns. So an essence, nature, autonomousness or independence, and or so I guess autonomy. I guess would be autonomy, and then without dependence on another. So just to convert them to nouns is appropriate as well. And so here it's saying the autonomy, the independence or autonomy refers to the nature of an object that has its own unique ontological status. So now it's giving a further description of this, specifically this one of those four. So that is again talking about how if there were this kind of nature, where what would it be to have a unique ontological status? It's a unique state of being able to abide, exist, a unique state of existing where it is not dependent on being posited by terminology or language and the designating mind, using terminology. And this is the meaning of autonomy, of independence. Now, why is it identified, or why is this one pointed out specifically and singled out? Because the lower schools, the lower philosophical paradigms, they also say that an autonomous or independent person doesn't exist. So they have that claim or that position, but they mean something different by autonomy there. So here, this is a subtler understanding of autonomy. So that's why it's being singled out here among those four. But it really, we're talking about, again, synonyms. So again, to use them more adverbally, so being established by way of something's own essence itself, being established by its own nature, being established by intrinsic nature. Those are all synonymous with each other. So whatever phenomenon, all phenomena being established by their own nature, from their own side. So that means, again, without depending on the designating mind using conventions and terminology, without relying on that. And so that is also called, again, a nature or essence. And so the lower tenet schools, they are not able to identify, they don't have the capacity to identify this subtler object of negation. And so, or the subtler understanding of autonomy and independence. And so even for instance, autonomy prasangika, the autonomy middle way, which is the Sautrantika prasangika, the Sautrantika madhyamika, once again, the autonomy middle way school, they also will say, as well as the Chittamatra and even the lower schools, they will say and accept that, okay, there does not exist an independent person, but what they mean when they say that is that it's they don't accept that there exists a person who is independent of the aggregates. So they don't accept the person independent of the aggregates. So it's the same word, independent or autonomous, but the meaning is different. Okay, so again, here in the Prasangika, our system that Tsongkhapa is elucidating here, then he's referring to a subtler type of autonomy, which means not depending on a designating mind that uses terminology to designate an object over there. And the object existing by its own uncommon way of being.
Oh yeah. Tiang pena tabala drudu taba tes, druzingi lui nguenes, o chidar taba tes shangnes, drude rangi nguegone chidar yin chebana, yudendu druini majube, ti chebar chedu meba tishindus, che dinam jangs tanyigi lui nguena, chidar nangwi nangzula cheba shangne, che tenamgi rangi nelu, chidabu yin nyamdus, 유딩도 제바나 치앙 마주바 인바 인라스 보다 디가스나 다 디가스로와 다 베디가스나 나 최담제 로 똑베 파다 좀 레스 아니 로 똑베 파다 따와라 마더비 유튜브만 비도 두지 요 말에 디요나 아니 랑싱 주바 랑원 주바 세디 자기래 라르와다 디 마주비 베디 다 가스나 베나 탁바 찾아라와 탁자라 준징 남도 깨와 디스나 시고르와 탁바 찾아지체 로와 베나딜라 계주딜라 탁바디 찾아지게 와체 아니 주인하신 우스니 키니 요와체 다디 뒤즈디 유셀라 미살라와 오 담로와 유셀라 미살라 딘지게 뒤즈지강라 땅 가지고 디강라 집조디 자지 신고 딘지지 통용데 아니 내 주주도 삼니 준징 로직 게임으로와 다디 준징이 로디 로 똑바 코랑 게 파다 점마도 지기 유기딩도 째네 아니 주 마주바르와 오 유딩도와 오 딜로 똑베 파다 점경원이 아니 딘데지 샤응도 어다 딘낭시진 최탐제양 로 똑베 파다 점경원이 샤베 유징원이 파 딱바 점레마도 지기 로 똑베 딱바라 마더비 유딩도 제바체나 니에지 요 말이스 로와 베디로와 째나 아 제도 매바 대신도 최디남장 롱원이 나주 샤바 최대남 랑아랑 내루지다 인념도 유딩도 제나 지양 마주바 인라 라서서와 인도전에 로 똑베 최담제 로 똑베 파다 정면에 요와지레마도지 로 똑베 파다 정나 마드비 유기딩도 제바이나 아니 니에지 요 말이스 인도전에 마다 마제빙 아니 유 당신 제비스는 니에메 세데다 인다 랑싱 마주바와 랑원의 마주비 빼 야쇼데다 탁지딩니와 타발라더니 준징이 남도지여와 오 디기 로 똑베 파다 자만도 지기 유기 땡도 째나 주니에요 말와 딘낭시 전에 최탐제 라랑게 되니 똑베 파다 자만도 지기 유기 땡도 째바이나 아니 니에메와도 찍바레 스페나 강사 알라디 강사기 도지기 똑베 되니 파다 자면 제수시안에 강사 때나 니에요데 이내 강사 도지기 로 똑베 파다 자면 샤바들라 마드비 강사기 다시 딘도 째나 아니 강연 니에메 강사기로와 차시 풍부일 셈나다고 낚시 풍부를 띵도 아니 강연 니에메로 와또 따든 쎄나 와 강사 거기 가서나 풍부 차시에 니에요 말에 풍부 레레와 니에요 말에 풍부 셈나 니에메 오다 팀 낚시 띵도 찌네 니에메 달로 똑베 파다 점긴 아니 샤바디기 침네 아니 유디 요바 샤고네 와 민주산이 최탐제 알로 남도게 똑바 따점긴 아니 자직이 남샤 타바 태바레스 와 민주산이 다 어디게 시인데 다 똑베 따점세 땅땅데 되는 타바라 주도 똑베 따 지달 따기도 오다 따주 디당 찍바이바 아니 최탐제 아니 로 똑베 따담도 마다비 유기딩도 째나 니주메바디 이마레스 오다 디 베딩이 두순이 제시 작용도
There, so now in the next sentence, there, take, for example, the case of an imaginary, I'll just read the whole paragraph. Therefore, autonomously refers to the nature of an object that has its own unique ontological status or manner of being. It is just this that is called essence or intrinsic nature. Okay, so now the part that was just explained. Take, for example, the case of an imaginary snake that is mistakenly ascribed to a rope. If we leave aside how it is ascribed from the perspective that apprehends a snake and try to analyze what the snake is like in terms of its own nature, since a snake is simply not present in that object, its features cannot be analyzed. It is similar with regard to these phenomena. Suppose that we leave aside analysis of how they appear, i.e. how they appear to a conventional awareness, and analyze the objects themselves, asking what is the manner of being of these phenomena. We find they are not established in any way. Okay, so this is giving a great example. The example is talking about a rope being apprehended as, being cognized as a snake, misperceived as a snake. So it's like how all phenomena are, well, they're merely designated by, they're merely designated out there by a conceptual mind. Yet we apprehend phenomena as though they're not merely designated by a conceptual mind, but are established with their own uncommon a way of being and existing, their own uncommon state of being. So this is an example where we are, thinking about kind of to explain what kind of scenario it would be is like in a time of day where you can't really see any object, anything very clearly. It's sort of things are a little bit fuzzy and blurry and maybe dark out, and you have a rope that's striped rope or some kind of modeled or striped rope that is there, and then you have a conception, a mind cognizing that as a snake. So that kind of mind, when you then you actually analyze, you see that. So in terms of just the perspective of that mind, where it's being designated as a snake, where that rope is being designated as a snake. So in the face of that mind, and the eye of that, from the perspective of that mind, or in the eyes of that mind, okay, you can talk about the appearance of a snake there, but in the actual object, when you go to analyze, then there's no snake whatsoever. So you can't analyze its features. There's just nothing there. There's no snake whatsoever there. And so it's like this with phenomena in general. So it's a really excellent example. So when you actually go and look in the object itself, then there's no essence and nature and so forth there. So what we say then, this is a common phrase, a common expression. So things exist without analyzing and examining, but when you go and analyze and examine, they don't exist. Okay, or sorry, they cannot be found. I'm sorry. Things exist when you don't analyze and examine, but when you analyze, then they cannot be found. So it's like this: the snake cannot be found anywhere there in the rope. And so when you analyze like something like the self, okay, so you can't find. So again, what is it that is the way that it appears, that it's apprehended? Well, as if it's something that doesn't depend on the designating mind, that is using terminology to designate out there, but that cannot be found anywhere when you analyze. That kind of self is not found anywhere when you analyze. And so this example is very good because it's exactly the same way that the conceptual mind posits things on to a basis of designation. And so when you look for the self, you don't find it within the aggregates, right? The parts of the self, the aggregates, it is not within them. It is not one of, it is not the aggregates or one of the aggregates. It is not within the aggregates. The self, that kind of self that doesn't depend on the designating mind, is not there at all. So it's not found within the basis of designation. So when you go and look for it, you cannot find it. And so this is the same way that the conceptual mind posits a snake over on that rope, is the same way that it posits this, self that doesn't depend on the designating mind out there. And so this is why it's such a good example, because the way of merely designating is the same for the example as well as for the way that we apprehend all phenomena.
Oh yeah. Oh, do it. Gedar Mizimbas, no, Tanibi, Shebi Wangi, Shaba Mimbe, Chur Tedala, Rangan Yune, Shalvis, Nilure, Yuba, Zimba days, starting the Diga Sudi, Chur Tamje, Lot Tobe, what in the Tabal Bruzina, Tadala, Lot Namdoke, Taba Zam Nangsing, Chur Tamje, Ani Karire, the Rangan Dojiki, Taniki, Tobe, Padazamingone, Yuba Jires. Ti Yuba di Imba la Rangshin Tinichi Imbala, 당 알아주고 지윤데 가르쳐 버려. 얘들아 로 남도기 파다점 이마디 맞은 바체 리니 로 남도기 타니 로이 파다점 많이 비 유랑게 투모만 비고는 유지 당 알아주 가지고 있는 지인되고 다 춘năng 계획으로 왕아랑도 차소 유모 받게와 고알라 계다 두서 강가기 계인데 아니 알아주 로 춘능 숙체쇼디 아니 네와 랑싱기 주바 덴바 주바 짐바 딘싱 마리바 세데 오다 진수디 로 최담제 로 타니비 똑베 파다점 많이비 아니 이루와 안 랑기 통음이 도는 두지 진고어 오다 대다 미세바 타니비 샤비 원기 짐비 최대라는 원이 샤비 내루 여바 짐바데 다 춘능 계단디 샤바리로와 최 말한 유명한서는 최담주 유수당 말한도 진두니 로가 차대 최담제 유비 내주디 가르스나 로 마다 마제빙은 로 똑바 파다점 인간이 아니 여바 짐바 하실라 말한 주게 되는 진연도 근데 텔레 도대 로 똑바 파다점 마인비 유장병원의 주바직 어딘데 진 낭네 아니 티 제수 장네 되니 추난도 깨니 아니 추미 이게 남도 왕게 되니 차소 유몽바야 배기 깨는데 어디 tinjegi 추난디 깨는데 차워 근데 전에다 동유 동비 따와도 공거래 세대다 tinjegi 추난 로 똑베 파다점 마이비 유튜브만 비도는 줍주지어와 어디 주바디 민두 삼바디 하고는데 아니 동니 하고와 세대 tinje지간 시작으로와 뉴스안에 다 동반이 하고하고 산삼디 대간이로와 최담제 최시간다 강이네요 아니 로 똑베 파다점 마이비 유 장병원의 주바직 요 말에 삼노다 딜라 고안이 아투다에들라 아니 동니라 고안이 세 tinje지간 시작으로와 땅은 동니 고만이데 가리기 깽이 잡았으나 최 간디지네요. 로 남도게 로 도지기 탄이게 또 배운 게 파다점 많이 봐. 아니 유랑 게 투모만 비들고는 줘 봐. 딘데지게 진바 샤다 이 송한상 아니 동반이게 고아들 가주 검지 제와 있네요. 레로우다 돈이 또 마투비 겐디 다 디게 춘한데 쮸보 깨와 통화 매반이로 와. 딘데게 진바디 쮸보 유 아니 춘항 딘생데게 또기 아니 로 친주로도 진주 내주 딘데레 쓰니 다디 여바 짐바테 소다 딘지 송도 소
So we're still in this paragraph here. Ignorance does not apprehend phenomena in this way. It apprehends each phenomenon as having a manner of being such that it can be understood in and of itself, without being posited through the force of a conventional consciousness. So I don't think the quote was ready yet. Yeah, that quote was not ready yet. So this is all phenomena we're looking at, which are all phenomena are merely designated by conceptual mind out there, without existing from their own uncommon way of abiding or way of state of being in the world, without existing from their own side. And this again, this is the opposite of how we apprehend things, the opposite of how ignorance apprehends things to exist. So there's a big difference between the way that things exist and the way that we apprehend or cognize things. There's a difference there. And so we cognize things as existing by way of their own nature, without being merely designated by a conceptual mind, but instead within the object itself, having its own unique and uncommon way of being in the world. And this is the condition, this is the cause that gives rise to all of our other afflictions of attachment, anger, and so on. They're all coming because this with this as the main affliction, the root of all those. This is truth grasping, the truth grasping ignorance. So this is the root of those. So the actual way things exist is by being merely designated out there by conceptual mind, but we don't apprehend them that way. That's their way of existing, but instead they're way so things do exist within this scope of being merely designated and labeled out there by a conceptual mind. That is how they exist, but instead we basically apprehend the opposite of that. We cognize them in the opposite. We turn away from the way things actually exist, and instead we grasp them and apprehend them as though they are not merely designated by a conceptual mind out there, and that instead they have their own uncommon way of being within the object itself, uncommon way of existing within the objects themselves. And this is the so this is so this way of apprehending, this is a hallucinating mind. This is we could call it a hallucination. It's a mistaken appearance, a confused appearance, but really it comes down to being a hallucination. And so actually then apprehending things to exist the way that we hallucinate them to, that is again that is what ignorance is doing, is the root of all these afflictions. So it's as if apprehending things that there's just an object in itself, the object sort of all by itself or in itself. And so this is what we have to, understand. This is what we have to understand to understand what emptiness is about. What is the view of emptiness about? An understanding of what the view emptiness is about comes when we have a clear understanding of this hallucinating mind, this mistaken appearance, and how it is mistaken, how it's grasping things to exist as though they are within themselves in their own uncommon way of being, without being designated by a conceptual mind. That is, as soon as we have an understanding of this, the meaning of this, objects existing by themselves, being, being in and of themselves, then we have an understanding of emptiness. So that's what it takes to get an understanding of emptiness. And so, but why is it difficult then to get an understanding of emptiness? Why is it that we study and read these texts and learn about it, but then still don't actually still have such a difficult time really understanding emptiness? Well, the obstacle is because we have only been having these hallucinations, these confused, mistaken appearances from births without beginning, from beginningless, taking birth beginninglessly. All we've had is this mistaken, confused appearance and apprehending things to exist this way. And so that's why it's so difficult to get an understanding of emptiness.
Oh yeah. Oh. 시jabi jevales toba yuba kuni yuba ni tang che toba meba yuba ni meba tedani gorma chaba taba doba la tabi julda rangi ngwe majuba nyeso she rangi ngwe majubi sul tedar sungso sunta jerumji ani 시jabi jeva panen dawa chabaji dejogiwa 시jabi dini jeva di khungdang ni khari sungwarsna ta chö tamje toba rangi doji tobe wangi shabi chudu yobale toba yoba kuni yobasna rangi doji toba azamgi ngani yobale tobe tabala madebi ani yujuji yomare ti mewadi ani tabala tabala jujugi namdogi wa chidar 다수 낭신기 최 탐지 아니 텐데비 아니 가스나 로 똑배 드니 랑랑이 도지기 남도 그 답이 제수 장니 여바 가스나 제마도 지랑기 도지기 남도 그 마답이 유수지 요 말에 어떻습니다 가스나 랑기 마주비 수디 다 똑배 딱점 경우니 자수지 송 거. 디jen데 다 된다 니가 돌아라 다 된다 니가 돌아라 왜 벌써 저런 깨지 쇼고도 깨 저런 것들이 깨 침무지 고도 돼 사운드 이 저런 거 업체는 네 가려 다 된다 대 그냥 녀디라고 된다 다 된다 디 인다 네가 수 똑바 요바 코네 요바니다 똑바 메바 요바니 세지도 와다 취어 담지 랑니 도지기 똑배 제수 장화레스 랑 도지기 남도기 파다기 점간이 요발레 랑니 도지기 남도라 마드비 유수지 요마레 스니 시엔데 다디 내가 전부 쇼지로와 공부를 썼는데 송요 말에 우마 공부를 썼나 제름지 갈스나 최남 때는 똑배 왕기 조수 시나 텔레 도데 진비 양진으로와 딘진기 때는 군 데라도 똑바 교회 수리다 단 각자 우에 소발라 각자 디게티니 마주비 츠 똑배 따점 세디 고아디 레와디 개침무 슈지레 스니르와 인도산에 다 똑배 따점 세디다 인다디 탄주비 가수 최담제드니 라니 도지기 남도기 파다점갱 아니 요바레 세기 다 똑배 따점데 간지지레 센디 다든다 빼 투모 축체쇼로디 진짜 탁바라 주긴 남 똑배 따바점 세계지도와 파다점갱 아니 주진기 남도디 깨니 신앙자와 다 유기 때도 제인데 아니 다 타발 주인바디 메디 신나디 라주고와 어디지도 최담제 아니 샤예디 로 똑배 파다점갱 아니와 파다점갱 아니 요바 지모도지 dimata parda tokpe takpala madebi yuzuji takshi tindu tsejudu nye yomari segi ta tokpe takdangdila ani kuwale di ta umagi shungnala ta yani yandu di nega chimu tuyong gore rwa jang tongpa niki tawa kuwala tokpe takzamgi kuwa di Geshe ta tokpe takpa sedi ta penam peji jana 풍불라 takpe nga sejorwa nga tokpe takzam seji nga dini nga 강사 dini 아니 풍부 때도 되니 가리래 다시 풍부를 뛰네 주비 딜라티니 나 신 똑배 따점기 바 샤니 제바이나 강사 니주요게 다디 똑배 되니 왔는 딱발라 마드비 유주지 시든도 제주잖아 아니 계시든도 가야 니주메게 너와 오 답배나 빼나신 빼지 디샤앙으로 빼나 파게 미지디 강바디 나라 미베나 다시 쓰긴 지지지 미디 가요레스나 파게 아니 자로 깨게 강바지도 디나라 대열에 라디 다 대체가 지나 그 딘데베 요리에서 똑베 팔다 점게 지수전에 제나 녀여와 강사디 다 딤멤버 딘데베 딘데베 유역을 딘데 미디당 코니디니 다시딘도 요리 요 말서 캐시 레레딘도 제나 미디 녀메로와 오 디나신체네로와다 최 강다 강이는 도지기 남도기 파다점긴 아니 샤비 자제 증인지레 마도지기 아니 디마다 베더니 당시된도 따된제나 니규 매바 임바디 오다 디기 다 고아딜라로와 빼샤수민다 같은다 지 칼로레 다 진다 가리레 루비 산지쟁이 빼샤다 민다지 반내 다바저 빼샤다 민다지 아니 가리레 자스 친구 시발하게 빼샤다 민다와 숨 된다 디 지용이 되는 단주배 가서 탁발라 주징이 남도기 빼딩니 시행거데 이내 슝기 값이 양 민다와 빼딩데 되는 거와 빼나 다 빼디 안에 된다 디 제시자다니 빼순데 디자를 제시자고
Now the question here, Chandrakirti's commentary on the 400 stanzas says, without any doubt, what exists only through the presence of conceptual thought and does not exist without conceptual thought definitely does not exist essentially, as in the case of a snake that is imputed to a coiled rope. Thus, Chandrakirti states how phenomena do not exist essentially. So, this is now Tsongkhapa is making this point clear and using this example again by citing a source of the commentary on the 400 stanzas once again by Chandrakirti. So all phenomena are merely designated out there by a designating conceptual mind. And so without existing, within the object, without existing within the object itself. And so this is like the example of a snake. If you apprehended a rope to be a snake, then this is like the way that we apprehend phenomena to exist without depending on conceptual mind designating over there, but by instead existing in the object itself. So this is very, very similar to this example. It's really the same. It's just the way that the mind apprehends that rope to be a snake is the same way that we apprehend phenomena to exist in this away without depending on a designating conceptual mind, labeling them and designating them over there. So the way phenomena exist is then by so there does not exist any phenomena. There do not exist any phenomena which are not dependent on a designating conceptual mind, which designates them over there. So the designating conceptual minds are all phenomena depend on that. All phenomena also are so this is again when we understand this point, then we will understand what the meaning of the truth grasping is. And so this is important to understand this way that phenomena, we're talking about phenomena being designated by the conceptual mind out there. And so the way that phenomena exists is by, again, not being established without, phenomena are not established without depending on the conceptual mind designating them out there. And so this is the most important example, and this is a very important example of understanding this, the way that we designate a rope to a snake to a rope, and then you actually generate fear. You have you're scared, but then as soon as you analyze and see that the rope is not a snake, and you see there's no snake over, there in the object, then the fear diminishes, the fear vanishes. So like this with all phenomena, when we apprehend them to exist from their from their uncommon way of abiding without being designated out there by conceptual mind, then we have afflictions. But then when we understand they don't exist that way, phenomena that is not found anywhere in phenomena, then we are freed, and then those afflictions are pacified. So as soon as we have an understanding of this being designated by out there by conceptual mind, then we will have an understanding of emptiness. So for instance, we also have a self, right? So moving away from the example now, and just looking at the I that's designated on the aggregates, or dependence on the aggregates. So there's this I, which is a person or an I that's designated over there by the designating mind. And when we so it does exist that way. It exists within being merely designated. So this is like, we just think of a person like Tashi. Tashi, if we say, okay, where's Tashi, and go, is he in the house? And so Tashi, we go look somewhere in the building or in the house, we go looking for Tashi. And so just within this framework or perspective of the designating mind, the conceptual mind designating phenomena, and phenomena depending on the designations of the conceptual mind, then we can go and look for Tashi in a building, and we can find Tashi. So we can find Tashi there in the building. Then when we go and ask, but where is Tashi within his basis of designation? Okay, so is Tashi in his aggregates? Is Tashi in his, any of his parts? Is he in his parts? Is he any among those parts? Then we cannot find Tashi. So we can't find him within the basis of designation of Tashi. We go and look through each basis of designation, each part of the basis of designation, or we could just say each basis of designation. And so without analyzing it this way, then we can say, yes, there are phenomena that exist within the scope of merely designating with conceptuality. Within that scope, yes, there are phenomena that have functions, and then there's actions and agents that do their functions. Okay, there are things that act and work. But as soon as we analyze within a basis of designation, well, where is Tashi? Where is the thing? then we cannot find it within the basis of designation. And so there, these are examples. So this is one of the examples. There are also other examples that are given in different texts. Here, where this is Ayurveda. We also have examples of Chandrakirti and different examples given by Shantideva.
Oh yeah, adoshini. Apena the Sanjijangi water Tevanala, Pedi Javersna, Pegi Dindiji Goyre, that mini Haganla Droni, Wata Yama mini Haganla Droni, and he again Hagang Munala, while Haganal, that's Mutier, that Mutini again, Mani Hani Tini, Haji Labala Dung Sesum Kejogi Haji Tier, Suludila Hashinajila Labala Kolo Tier. 다 군이 춘제 쪽에 니디기 아니 지기스나 된다 가스나 디 동제숨 락바라 동제숨 체조디 아니 가스나 세메기 부레스 아니 콜로 체조디 라왕주레스 락 지기스나 디 마레스 지단론이 디 동제숨 체조디 라왕주레 콜로 체조디 세메기 부레스 군이 제쇼 잡대로와 다제 자베기 디 무디니 지기 라왕주레 지기 세메 부레스 민 그즈무니들 제 잡대르디 군이 제 잡니 다베 제 쇼용데 아니 디티라 미테스 지 녀우지라 미다 하간지 티라 테스 미 리바쳔바주 요서와 왔다 디라 깨저티가 도디 아니 리바쳔바디 데시 녀바 베 쇼지 사부자니 디 리무디 하원주야 말이 시메 보역 수간지 말했지 디 리무디라 로 똑베 파담장은 아니 디레 스니 라비온데 아니 디샹나 디기르 스와 어두치데 로 똑베 따정은 원에 샤용데 아니 지 시딘도 딘데지요 유기딘도 제나 니가 그 하원주야 말이 세메기 부야 말이 스니 다 디시데 오다 딜로 똑베 땅정은 아니 다 고니 제쇼로 와와 지기스나 세메기 부레 지스나 참주 랑설 하원주레스니 제 슈빙 나야기 디갑라 제 쇼에기 겐디 남도기 똑베 파다 삼기 아니 제수 당네 제디 중화로와 다 저바디 시도양 남도기 파다 삼기 아니 딘데레마도 유기 때문에 마주바레 스니 시엔데 저바디 시와 집에 빼 딘데지 송여리와 지 로비 산지쟁이 슝나라와 다빠네 다와 잡아기 우마 주바나라 아니 싱다 콜로라 빼잖이로와 싱다 콜로여와 따가리 싱다 콜로디 아니 싱데게 예라다 강가 초점들라 따가리 스니파 민 딱바 짬낭시 아니 강살라 소바딘 조양 아니 풍볼딩도 되니 로톡베 딱점레 스페나 싱다디 아니 랑기 다시디니 땡도 되니 싱다 콜로 스니파 로와타 따당다 따이테로 따가리다 강가든주 강가 초점들라 싱다 콜로 스니 민 따가리 라게로와 마도 지기 아니 레레 땡도 제네 다 똑베 따점 파 샤바 마인비 유iten도 되나 다디야 말이 콜로디야 말이 스투르디야 말이 강데야 말이 엘라데 가야 말은 니에요 말와 이나야 로 똑베 따점게 안에 아니 자지게 남샤 태고 와다 빼 딘나시 전에 강사다 취어 간데지나야 랑기 다시 땡도 남도게 따점게 안에 자지게 남샤 태기레 했으니 신다 콜로라 빼전에 빠낸 나와 좀 숭당데 우마주고 나와 다너신 자스치무 시발라기 아니 준준 나라더니 규마라 빼전이로와 규마게 되니 자두와라게 되니 tammu tenyondi ani ngazi mi tammu tenyondi ani phage da garire da tammu garitana ti lo tokbe parda zeng ngani shawaji modo yugi dingdo jena nieyo marwa dinangshi jeni chö 간re ka inayang lo namdogi parda zeng ngani ani yobaji remodo namdogi parda la teba maimbi yutumo mombi dulu dingdo dini jena ni ju yo mare so da du jeni da pe dinde mongbo xiang 다 똑베 따점 세더라 고안예디 탄주비긴다 디가수 다랑싱 마주비 동니예들라 랑싱 주비 딘징기 유디 모드 지와라 덴바 주바 진수디 아니 모드 지와라 로 똑베 파다담디 로 똑베 파다점이 원시 유수디 간데레스 디 고알니 달로 똑베 파다점 고알리나 또로 똑베 파다점 마인비 유투몽 주바지 요마레스 디 두바지요나 아니 덴바 두바 차기레스 오다 징에도들 딘징라기레스 오다 공바랍스 나라 아니 저는 또 배운 거 조수 시에나 텔레도데 짐바 딘징 데라도 셰바 주베스 인도자니 통마 또 배운 거 조수 셰바라 아니 또 배운 거 조수 디바에 아로와 공발업서 나는 지름지기 되니베 카스 세우 빼 망부전의 루 망부장이 송을와 고마 공발업서 나오다 뒤 송난데 어디 내지 주다니 다 똑베 따점게 고와디 인데 똑바 여바 코니 여바당 똑바 매베 여바니 세 시제비 대완나 송도와 시제바 그러나라 똑바 여바 되자라 쏟아 유니니까 연다 된다 또바시 로다지마 수시진 스니오다 두스니 시제비 자와 그러나라 송을다 뒤반에 나와저비 송와디 아니 제름지 쿵단이 최담지 똑베 따바점 아니 요와레스 똑베 따점게 아니 자직이 남샤 테바레스 어디 제시드니 송도스 어디 베디드니 주샤
I read this quote already, right? So, yeah, yes, okay. So this is continuing with this quote and the other examples given. So I apologize that again he mentioned also Buddha Palita. So here we're talking about here the text is talking about the example used by Aryadeva, but there are three others that are used. So one is by Buddha Palita, one by Chandrakirti, and then one by the Bodhisattva Shantideva. And so the one used by Buddha Palita is actually sort of a story, a little anecdote, where these two people go into a temple and they see that there's paintings there. There are paintings on the walls or in the temple somewhere. And so one of the paintings is of a god, a deity or a god with like a wheel in the some kind of what do you call implement of a wheel in their hand, and the other one has like a what is it, a spear or a trident, and so so one of the people, the two friends that go in, one says, oh, that one there with the wheel is Hlawang Chuk. Hlawang Chuk means Ishvara. And then Genla Hlawang Chuk dang Shamba di
Semegi puse hajo, semegi puse.
Semegi bu di lecture ke thola kanin.
Tange lecture ke hamas, tangda ji semegi puse.
Semegi is yeah, so I'm not sure what the like Indian
maybe Krishna.
Maybe Krishna, thank you. Why not? So so Krishna and Ishvara, let's say. And so so he says, okay, the one with the wheel is Ishvara and the one with the trident is Krishna. Yeah, I think that's right, because I remember Krishna holds a trident. Okay, very good. And so then the other guy says, though, the other friend says, no. The one with the wheel is Krishna, the one with the trident is Ishvara. And they have a big fight about it. They start arguing. They have a big argument about it. And so they say, no, back and forth. This one is Ishvara, that one's Ishvara, back and forth. And then finally there's another person in the temple, I guess maybe the temple keeper or something, sitting there in the temple. And so they go to ask that person, so, okay, who is that? Is that Ishvara or Krishna? And who is that? And so then the temple keeper says, well, he gives a very profound answer. He says, actually, no, those are neither Ishvara or Krishna. Those are not anyone. Right? They're just merely labeled by the mind. They're just merely labeled over there by the mind. I mean, within your, your capacity to designate with concepts and designating by the mind, then okay, it doesn't matter whichever one you want to call it is okay. Whichever one you want to call Krishna is okay. Whichever one you want to call Ishvara, that's okay. So he really gave a profound answer there by showing, just like this example or this anecdote, really that's what we do with all phenomena. We merely label them with the conceptuality over there, out there, but then we take them to be real. And then we, they, like these people, they got in this argument, and then as soon as they recognize, oh, we just labeled that, then their argument was pacified, their argument died. And so that's one example. And so another example is given by Chandrakirti, which is to use the illustration of a chariot, and which is like well, I think everyone knows what a chariot is. So a chariot, it's like an old car, I guess. And so a chariot has, all these different parts, but it has, the wheels, and it has the base, and the different, all the different pieces of it that make it work. And so Chandrakirti kind of uses that as the basis for analyzing, and says, so you have all these pieces together and this kind of collection of things, but when you actually go one by one to search, do you find the chariot? So no, you don't find the chariot in the wheels, you don't find the chariot, in the seat, you don't find the chariot in the all the other pieces of it. And so this is another example about how all phenomena are merely designated by the mind. And within that being designated by the mind, it is reasonable and it's logic. There's a logical consistency in things having functions and there being agents and actions. There is logical consistency, and it's feasible and reasonable to posit those or understand, to talk about those, but that's only within being really designated by mind. Then the other final example that Shantideva gives the example of like an illusionist who makes this kind of show out of simple objects, but then makes it appear as if there's animals and different things going on. So the people watching the show, they see this exhibition going on, but again, when you actually go analyze within the objects there, the simple objects that are kind of the basis of that, then you cannot find any of the characters of the show. Okay, so this is these are examples to illustrate how what this object to be negated, this, which we call this establishment by way of a nature, and establishment as truth, or true establishment. And so what is this way of apprehending things as being truly established? Well, if we understand how things are merely designated out there by the mind, then we'll understand what it means to apprehend them as truly established. So it's sort of, these are very closely related. And so it's also in Chandrakirti, in Tsongkhapa's other, one of his other texts called the illuminating, what is the English here? We have it, illuminating the intent. Illuminating the intent. Then there he really emphasizes very strongly, more so even than here in the Lamrim Chenmo, how important it is, essential it is to understand, to gain an understanding of this conceptuality, the process through which conceptuality, labels things out there, and how phenomena are actually established independent on that conceptual labeling process. And so this is back to the quotation here by Aryadeva, where he says, without any, by Chandrakirti, but the commentary on Aryadeva's text, without any doubt, what exists only through the presence of conceptual thought and does not exist without conceptual thought definitely does not exist essentially. So this also is making this point about how we have to understand how things exist independence on through the presence of conceptual thought.
어두체 아테나 난기 로이왕기 샤바 미바 랑기 무요고니 유기 땡도 두바 텔라 다감 당신 셰셀라스 티니 체벌기 로시 강사기 땡도 메바니 강사 담에다 미나라서도 추기 땡도 메바니 추기 담에 숭베스 당신 대 강사당 추기 땡도 여바 진바니 당진 와 다운니기 진바 슈기 또바 뉴스다 다tum 자는 거 가서는 로직이 로 탄니기 똑배 팔다 좀 샤발라 마드비 유근이 두바디 간데레스 빼당 다디 고는 뭐 지시 잡사서와 진짜 송장 아니 된데베 로 탄니기 똑배 원게 팔점 딱바점 많이 비 유수지 요나 딜라 다유 소다 다 매, 세다 다 요다 매, 시사기 다디, 오다 다 참모디 디간이 샤오레스. 그와 당매 또비 따와, 세와 당매 또비 따와, 세기 당매, 다 유에스 지티에기 다디, 아니 딘데베로 또비 파다자 마인비 유주주요나 아니 다 세디 딘데지레 오다 디 다디 디니 시 강사기 땡도 샤와이나 강사기 다 디 메바디 강사기 당매샤 덴데베 로 단위게 또 배운 게 샤자만 유수디 아니 강사를 신베더니 풍소 미가 소비 풍소기 땡도 이제 샤와이나 아니 추기다 디 메바디 추기 당매 스니와 다 추기 당매다 강사기 당매 다 동관이디 뒤나 아니 강사 당매기 동니당 추기 당매기 동니 니나 뒤네 송완이 스고로와 그와 당매티니 좋아는 그지 추단 강사 예외니수 송 스니와 안 좀nen데기로와 다추 탐지기 동관이디 수두나 강사기 땡기 랑신 마주비 동니지당 강사를 신비 풍속의 땡기 랑신 마주비 동니니 돈 지시 잡아래 다 강사기 땡도 랑신 마주 세기 랑신 디당 풍속의 땡도 랑신 마주 세 랑신 주바니라 주루 주단디 지바지장레스 다 치식이 내기 그와 치시 미자위 내기 아니 강사기 당매기 동니당 추기 당매기 동니 다 치시 녀가리 온기라라 티야로와 아니 강사디 녀가와당 아니 다시 풍고딘 중 라와 인상 강사게 땡기 동니디 녀 디니 가리 라와당 풍속이 땡기 동니디 녀가와레스 와 오다 두시인데 다 강사기 당진다 추기 당진 스니까 진 땡데라 주니기 통민 마리 받으라 아니 가리레 딘진 강사 당진다 추기 당진이가 요래 쓴 딘진 유몽진 스니디 송소와 인도전에 딘진 유몽진 티니 아니 가스나 어디 에라 당부 마리 받으라 니가 딘진 유몽 딘진 되기장 에라 당부 마리 자와 지기래 아 강사 당진 되게 에라 당 마리 자와 거기 자와디 지그제 쓴 피해기다 강사기 당진 라에당 추기 당진 라에기 오다 디 다디 로 탄이기 또 배운 게 팔다점 마인비 유주디라 다샤니 디 강사디 딘데지 짐바이나 강사기 나도 짐바 아 강사리 심비 풍소도 딘데지 짐바이나 아니 추기 나도 짐바 수다 강사기 당지당 추기 당지디 미유 미자와리 디는 진당지 바리스 봐 넘버디 찍바레스 넘버디 로 탄이 또 배운 게 샤자 마이비 여바 진수지레스 미바디 아니 강사당 추기 예외도 고네 아니 강사기 다 추기 다 강사 담매기 돈이 추기 담매기 돈이서보다 딘데지가니 아니 샤바 지고레 스님마 타둠 자윤데 다에니마 빼 돈이마 또베 따점기 지시디 잡 또베 따점기 지시 자니 아니 또베 마다비 유주지요나 아니 다도 주바세 차레 오다 디즈미로들라 당진 쓰고레 디 당진들라 넘바니 요레스 강사기 땡도 다도 주바 진수지당 강사레심이 풍소기 땡도 다도 주바 진수니기 오다 디임바디 오니 또기 아니 강사기 다다 추기 다니 강사 담에다 추기 담에 텔라피비 슈기 아니 강사기 다다 추기 다니 짐바디양 아니 디기 또 하고응우레 스니케지 시엔드 다 강가 추 düğündü 동관이 강가 düğündü 강사 담에게 돈이다 추기 담에 돈이 아니 돈이 또 발라 계칭인데라 강사 다도 짐이 당진당 추기 다도 짐이 당진 오다 디 시리 두스니다 오저야 부치 투베디 다 돈이도 따와 돈이도 따와서 제시디 오다 딘지 시간에 바고레습니다 지름지디 소무도스
Thus, next paragraph. Therefore, what exists objectively in terms of its own essence without being posited through the power of a subjective mind is called self or intrinsic nature. The absence of this quality in the person is called the selflessness of the person. Its absence in phenomena such as eyes, ears, and so forth is called the selflessness of objects. Hence, one may implicitly understand that the conceptions of that intrinsic nature as present in persons and objects are the conceptions of the two selves. So we've been discussing now how phenomena exist by way of being merely designated by conceptual mind out there without being established with their own uncommon way of being, and how ignorance grasps them the opposite way of that, as if they did exist with their own uncommon way of being without depending on conceptual mind merely, without depending on a designating mind merely labeling them out there. And so what is it then? And so this is also called the self, right? So this way of this hypothetical self. And so when we talk about selflessness, or we talk about self, then what is it? What is this self? It's this hypothetical that if things existed without depending on being merely designated out there by the conceptual mind with terminology, that's the self. Okay, that if they existed that way, that is the self we're identifying. And so when we look at then the two types of self or selflessness, they go hand in hand, then there's in relation to a person as well as in relation to phenomena. So in terms of a person, or within a person, if we're apprehending a self, that's the self of persons. And then in terms of the person, if we're refuting the self or seeing the selflessness, that's the selflessness of persons. And then same with the aggregates and etc., other phenomena besides a person. So the aggregates and other phenomena, all other phenomena, then when we are apprehending a self within those, then that's the self of phenomena. And when we're seeing the selflessness in that, that's the selflessness of phenomena. And so when we're talking about the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena, then those are the two types of emptiness. So all, the emptiness can be explained, or emptiness can be, how do you say it? Emptiness is all types of emptiness are included within those two. Okay, also all emptinesses are included within those two: selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena. So the way of their being established, or their way of existing, is the same. It's just that the basis of specification or qualification is different. So the basis being qualified as selfless is different. And so that's either a person or some other phenomenon besides a person, like the aggregates. Okay, so sort of the reason for making that distinction, if we go back, remember what that was, is because it's easier to gain this kind of certain awareness and understanding of the selflessness in relation to persons, the selflessness of persons, whereas it's more difficult to gain the sort of certain knowledge and awareness of the selflessness of phenomena in relation to aggregates and so on. So this also now connects back to the 12 links of dependent arising. And the first link of ignorance here is this truth grasping, this self-grasping ignorance. And it is also the root of samsara. So self-grasping ignorance is the root of samsara. Sorry, self-grasping of phenomena is the root of samsara, and so is self-grasping of persons. They're both the root of samsara, of cyclic existence. And so again, this is the grasping of objects that as though they existed from with their own way of being, without depending on the designating mind merely designating them over there on the object, but existing from within the object itself. And so that kind of apprehension or cognition, that way of holding things to exist, that is, and if you do that to a person, to meaning you apprehend, if you hold a person to be like that, then that is the self-grasping of persons. If you hold a phenomena other than a person to be like that, that's self-grasping of phenomena. So you can say the focal object, or the focus of those minds are distinct. Those two, self-grasping of person, self-grasping of phenomena, the focus is distinct, but the sort of attribution of the mind, which we can also call the style of cognition, or the cognitive appraisal, those are the same. So that we could say also just the way of holding is the same, even though the focus is different. right? The focus being the object being observed. The technical term is usually yeah, sometimes it's observed object, sometimes it's the focal object. There's a variety of various translations of that, but that's different. But then the way of cognizing, the way of holding is the same. Okay, so then this is again how we to understand emptiness, we kind of gain a thorough understanding of these two classifications of self and selflessness, and that's part of the process of gaining an understanding of emptiness. And so when we talk about the obstacles to realizing emptiness, that's exactly, again, these two kinds of self-grasping are the obstacles to realizing emptiness.
야, 다 도신 다든다 대주 dom지기 지제시지 사람님이 가르치면서는 강사기 당진의 축의 당진이 계림당 계위림바당 양 계위림바니 민다와 차대 다 강사 당진의 축의 당진이 계연된 거라서 줄라와 다 티네 로 춘난디 계연데 아니 축의 다도 짐비지마디 냐라게 디기라 띠네 아니 강사 다도 짐비지마디 깨와 있어 당아란서 배나 나 세기 나 풍벌었다비 나지 여러와 디 로라 마샤코니 풍볼 딱시기 풍보디 삼롱이라 고월 강사로라 샤발라 강사기 다시 풍보디로라 샤왕도 저거디 풍볼라 마 미비 아니 당진디 냐라 깨인디 추게 당진디 냐라 깨월 다 디제수 풍볼라 딱빙아 세디 디제라 삼롱 코인디 아니 나디라 풍볼라 딱빙 나디라 미비 아니 랑싱기 두바진비 진바 당진디 아니 제라 강사 당진디 제라 깨월에 스니 깨인디 추게 당진디 냐라 깨 강사 당진디 제라게 다 디마 고무용이 다 강사 응랑주 다지 동료 공개 강사지 아니 디 당진이 몇바 소연데 아니 강사 랑신 주바 짐바디 녀라 몇바 소 디제수 아니 풍보랑 신주바 짐바디 제라 쳬바레스 군생 가리스나 강사 랑신 주바 짐바디 아니 가스나 배노 고무용데 가스나 니몬교나 말이 지소라 딸리 중말로 돈 다니 난주보에 다니 고바 제스니 시엔디 다 차소 니몬바 강가게 자와진디 지다르샤 지다디 강사 당진 오다티 고고도 섬네 난주비 고무용데야 강사 담에게 따와딩이라 고문거래 체윤데야 강사 다도 짐비기 시유딩이라 케와디가스는 가사 당진이 짐바디 셰데즈 중아체 추게 당진이 짐바디 에즈 셰체레고 가스나 강사디 니에가와 인디 텔라미비 강사다 풍부니나니 강사다 풍부니나니 강사디 니 가와당 풍부딩에 라와인상 니 가와라 미비 아니 가리레 짐바디 아니 중화체 대시 중화체 니 라와라 미비 짐바디 셰체와 디림비 왕기장 아니 강사 당진디 니라 체루레 틸라테네 아니 추기 담에디 추기 다도 짐바디 체루레 스노다디 제르미지게 람밀 중분나라와 아니 게인도 추기 당진기 강사 당시 깨와 인장 따와 깨와나 운도 강사 담에게 따와 또네 추기 담에게 따와 깨고서 스네 람림 중분나라 제름지 어다 딘데스는 다듬 때문에 송요레스 어다 디게 제시도 주인스.
And then we'll add a little bit of explanation as a summary of what we just went over. And so this is talking about these two kinds of self-grasping and selflessness. So there's a distinction here for the when we talk about self-grasping or the selflessness of persons versus phenomena. There's a difference in their order of arising in the mind and then the order of being eliminated or removed from the mind. So when we're talking about their order of arising, then the self-grasping of phenomena arises first. Self-grasping of persons arises later or second. The reason for this is that the self-grasping without even talking about the self-grasping, but just in general, to even have a thought of I, or to have I sort of appear before the mind. First, it depends on the aggregates already having appeared to the mind. So there has to first be some understanding of, or just appearance is really the word. So there has to be some aggregate appearing to the mind, and then the I can appear. The thought of I can come. And so that's why the self-grasping of phenomena occurs before the self-grasping of ignorance, because the self-grasping of persons, because the person itself is depends on the aggregates, right? A person is labeled in dependence on the aggregates, and so so the I, which depends on the aggregates, appears after the aggregates themselves appear. However, now when we talk about selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena, well, when you're meditating on emptiness and meditating on selflessness, then the selflessness of persons is understood first, whereas the selflessness of phenomena is understood second. And so the reason for this, and so that means also that the self-grasping of persons is eliminated first, and the self-grasping of phenomena is eliminated second. So the order of arising is reversed from the order of removing them is reversed from the order of their arising. So the reason for that is, well, all the afflictions like attachment and so forth, they're all dependent on the root, which is the view of the perishing aggregates, and that's an afflictive ignorance that observes the I. So it's observing the I. So there's just a bit more familiarity with the self-grasping of persons. There's more. It's something that's sort of just bigger in our experience, in our mind. It's easier to, again, just in general, gain understanding of the person than it is to gain an understanding of phenomena. It's easier to have this sort of like definite, not just gain an understanding, but to have this definitive certainty which knows sort of what a person is, than it is to have this definitive certainty knowing what the other phenomena are. It's just it's just easier. So that's why this point is made by Tsongkhapa Je Rinpoche in the middle length Lamrim. So there was a quote that Genla gave from that text, which since I don't have with me in English, I'll just say that it basically makes this point that first you eliminate self-grasping of persons and meditate on that, and then eliminate self-grasping of phenomena, meditate on that. Okay, so we'll stop our lesson here, and if there are any questions, then we'll begin question and answer session. Was there one in the chat, maybe? I was sort of just asking for clarification. Oh, someone wrote it, so okay. The answer is there. Thank you.
얘라 단다 동익이 차라 숨디 양자직 숨로는.
돈이 차라 숨 말이다. 땡데 차라 숨 나와.
땡데 차라 숨 거다.
So please repeat the 3 levels of subtlety of dependent arising.
나서 다 땡데 차라 숨디 너네 다 땡데 라쇼디 디레 규제나 땡네 중에 땡데스 티 라쇼 지고 티 가스나 다디 뇌숭레라고 지부 강인의 규제나 땡네 중화레스 지부 강다 강인의 어디 티 땡데 작바 임바디 로라 차대쇼체 틸레데즈 티니 다 지가스나 다시라 뚜비 땡데스 로와 최 강다 강인의 랑기 다시라 떼네 주바레스 로와 다 베나 품바이나 품벽이 다시 아니 또디와 샵슈면 들어 떼네 품바 라와레스 강사스나 강사기 풍봉하라 떼네 강사 스니디니 라와레스 단 강다 강인의 랑아랑기 떼서기 다시라 떼네 주비 땡데디 제시자는데 떼즈 땡데디 가스나 자기 규제를 떼네 중에 땡데세디 아니 다 주다 호마에 베나 제시자 투에 와다 인다 주다라 자와이나 심자마 민제 도와 제라마도 되버 심자마 관계 디 땡데기 남샤 지고래 다 다시라 뚜비 땡데세디 다 우마랑 주비 값수다 디제시디 축체자고 땡데 다시라 뚜비 땡데세디 다 디데지 로라 차카바도지 자기 규제라 뚜비 땡데딜레 다시라 뚜비 땡데디 로라 차카바 다 텔레장 다 차쇼디 많이 가리래 민장 따요 점기 땡데스 되가스나 아니 최 강다 강인 라니 독지기 되니 독배 남독이 제수 장와라 뛰네 샤바레스 딜라 마드비 되니 유수지 요마레 세데다 디다 땡데 참모 다디 턴주비 모두 되시 자투와 말와 다 동니기 따와 고안니게구나 다 틴데기 다 민장 따요 점기 땡데 오다 디기 고안니 투와 다 민장 따요 점기 땡데스디 로 독지기 완전 파다 점이바 땡도 아니 랑기 다시라 뛰네 주바 세데다 니소지 그리고 티체도 다 독배 따좀 나와이나 다고 심마 주비 추진변을 가르치다 지고라세 다다 지가서는 심마 주비 매바도에 로 독배 랑진 독배게 제수단에 샤디 셰어 강사게 다다 추게 다 신조야 독배 따좀 게지디 셰어데 이내 민장 따요 점게 땡제 세지 따요 게지디 셰사 요말 랑기 다시라 뛰비 따요 세디 인도산에 다 민장 따요 점게 땡제디 다 땡제 차쇼로디 다 민장 따요 점게 땡제디 인비 군생게 삼로 코연도 아니 랑싱게 마주바레 세디로와 강제 땡중 많이 비 땡제 동바요 많이 강제 동바 많이 비 땡제 요고 많이 쓰다 가스나 최 간단히 강에는 땡제 인비 군생게 랑싱게 동바레스 랑싱게 동바 인상 아니 가스나 땡제레 세게 제시 자야디 오다 민장 따요 점게 땡제게 통이 제시 자고 오다 디 땡제시 자에 슝 주다라지나 오마 탄주비 슝님도 디 제시 자 오마 탄주비 체베마도 다 랑주바 민지 체베 제시 자 마투에 땡제 차쇼디 다 디지고 어 누구신이 다 땡제 따라 차라 숨세디 어 땡제지 다 주고레스 맞
터지나.
There are three levels of subtlety of dependent arising. So the coarsest one is called the dependence on causes and conditions. And this is really the easiest one to understand. It's the easiest to have, again, appearing in your mind. So this phrase appearing in your mind really means to, have the understanding of its meaning clearly kind of there in your mind, clearly being known. So that's the easiest one. It's something that is relatively simple to understand. And so it's considered the coarsest type of dependent arising. Then at a subtler level than that is what's called dependence on a basis of designation. Dependence on a basis of designation. And so here it's a bit more difficult to have appearing in your mind. And so it's considered subtler. And so for instance, like a pot is dependent on and this is a kind of certain kind of, maybe more like a pitcher or something. But anyway, it's like an object that has a bulbous belly and a what is it called? A convex base. So that kind of thing, like that kind of shaped object, like a pitcher, has its basis of designation on which it depends. The shape, that bulbous belly and convex base. So that's the pitcher depends on that, and likewise the person depends on the aggregates which is the basis of designation. And so this is when we look at the different tenet systems, again, the different Buddhist philosophical paradigms, we are able to understand that this is subtler because not all of the schools actually even posit this. Now, all the schools do posit dependent origination, but not all the degrees of subtlety. So this one is really most emphasized by the Svatantrika Madhyamaka, the autonomy middle way school. So that's who really focuses a lot on this dependence on the basis of designation. Then even more subtle than that, we have the third level, dependence on a mind merely, dependence on being merely designated out of a conceptual mind. And so this is the most subtle version or level of dependent arising. And it's really for us to generate an understanding of the view of emptiness, then it's necessary to generate an understanding of this, which is also called just, phenomena existing as mere names. and sorry, existing in designation and designated and mere names. So phenomena being designated in mere names is another way of saying this being merely designated out there by conceptual mind. And so we have to have an understanding of this to understand emptiness. So that's why it's difficult to understand and more difficult to have appear in your mind. And so there's another factor here where we talk about the reason, right, for this kind of dependent arising is because the phenomena which exist in this way are not established by way of a nature. And we can use that as a reason to understand that phenomena are dependent arisings. And we can use the reason of being dependent arising, dependently arisen, to also prove or understand that phenomena are not established with a nature. So one can prove the other. They can both be used as reasons for the other. And when we talk about this kind of back and forth reasoning here, or back and forth use of these two as reasons and theses proved, that's dependent arising referring to the subtlest level of dependent arising here, this being merely designated by conceptual mind out there.
I have a question. So these subtle dependent arisings, the three different levels that we've just been talking about, they don't correspond directly to the 12 links we've been accustomed to talking about, I gather. Is that correct?
텐데라 주니 세디 다 규제는 텐데 중화 텐데 세디와 텐데라 주니 nga마nga마라 텐데 치마 중화레스 와 디유베 디주 디케베시 디가스 다딘다 텐데 얘라 주니 모주 주는데 다 주는 되게 송하르와 얘라 동 마리바 중화인사 니바 두지길레 중화레 니바 두지길레자 티니 텔라티니 숨반 남시 텔라티니 시바 민수 아니 nga바 두슨 텐데라 주니디 nga마nga마 규체발 텐데 치마 중화 치마 용화라 nga마nga마라 뛰는 중원자 뒤땡지 숨긴다니 규제는 뛰는 중에 땡지 대시디 대강을 주고 그래서 어두스나다.
The 12 links of dependent arising are an example of the causal dependent arising. So that was the first of the three kinds. So this is dependent arising on causes because it's a situation of, or a description of things which are dependent on a former event giving rise to a later event. So the first link, first link comes first, then the second link, and the later one comes, and the later ones depend on the former ones coming first. And so there's the phrase from the sutras that by that arising. By this arising that arose, by this ceasing that ceases. So this is showing this kind of order of first the cause and then the next result arising. And so the first cause of the link of ignorance gives rise to the link of the compounded action, and then the link of compounded action gives rise to the link of consciousness, which gives rise to the fourth link of name and form, which gives rise to the fifth link of the sense sources, and so on through the 12 links.
So yeah, I guess what confuses me is I think of the I must have a different understanding of the parts then, because I guess things like name and form and the 6 sources and feeling and craving, those are not parts. Is that correct? I mean, what are the
parts then? Before I translate it, can I just ask, like, well, so parts of what would you be saying?
Well, in the second level of the subtle dependent arising, it's the dependence on parts, the basis of designating.
Right, but there's a thing which is dependent on the parts. So when you ask, are they parts? Are you thinking of parts of a whole of something, or just in general, are they parts? That's just a general question.
Well, maybe that's why I'm confused. You know, so maybe I just need.
I'll just ask that question then and see how he answers it.
What question? Which one?
Are they parts? I'll just ask, are they parts? That's fine. That's a fine enough question. Again, then he that berna kichi juk dong because kichi dong any namshe la soba that means that's all got a tuksa di gares and any that's what sangma young chashe la toba dashi la toba marves chesang that's a young gares like chashe ro chesang tender ki charang nibadi di concept toba chagdogi na toba sagidusa.
네. 다시 지당 진짜 디 대시 장의 흉이 대시 장의 그 시험도 지 시주나 랑이 낚시라 뛰는 주비 땡제 인비 캡 민장 따위성 땡제 인비 캡와 시주나 다이는 시주나 랑이 유견을 땡제 주비 땡제 당부도 인비 정말 유견을 땡제 주비 땡제 세디 유지게 땡도 모두 두마시 땡도 요 말이야. 와 땡제라 주니 강가 랑이 낚시라 뛰비 땡제야지 랑이 민장 따위성 땡제야지 이는 땡제라 주니데 마 송용도 아니 규제라 때문에 중에 땡제 시샤시네 마디 시작요레스 마도지기 양 땡제 니와도 숨바 마열 말했고 말했어 다디 마 제시자에 차라 로와티 가스나 우주체에 차라 코 우주체 깔려요선 되게 차라 차와레스 마도지기 당보디 말이 니바디 말 숨바리 티시고 말했어 와 당고보이나 땡제 순간이 비착 규제를 때문에 중에 땡제 인비 캡 다시라 때문에 중에 땡제 인비 캡 아라 민장 따요성 밑에 비찹 어디 순간이 비찹성인데 엄마 탄주 members 되시 자 두고 말. 와 다디 민장 따요성 밑에 세디 시좀 서비 강라 시디 땡데라 주니 되야 민장 따요성 밑에 아니 엄마 란주베 시드나 땡데 비찹스고 다 엄마 란주바다 엄마 탄주바 니게 값수 아니 땡데 니바디 레고 다 땡데 당보디 다 두다 시게 값 되시 자야지 차와. 인도산에다 고 땡데라 주니디 땡데라 주니 세여줘라 땡데라 주니 주부 말에 시주나 랑기 다시라 되비 땡데 인거래 똑베 따점기 땡데 인거래 이나야 진짜 디시 자 투마도 비게지 셔와레스 와 유게라 되비 유게라 땡데 중에 땡데 세디 아니 땡데 디시 자 레라쇼 디두다 호메 디시 자 투베 다 시주나 랑기 다시라 되비 땡데 인거래 세디 다 우마랑 주바 인제마도 지 심자마 민지 디시 자 투고 말 다 딜레장 땡데나 민장 민장 따요점 그 땡데 인고래 세대다 우마 탄주비 모두 지시자 두고 말. 디진도 다 된다랑 주든다 람림 하동 지금 시샤진의 시엔도 땡 시루 차베 줄라 땡데 순간이 비켜. 지 인고래스. 와. 어디 이나 임바디 당 오저 치용도 땡 오저 제깔라고 요래. 와. 어디기 제바샤고래스. 어디 중.
Yes, that's true actually that we could even say, for making a logical statement of pervasion, that if something is an established base, an existent thing, then it's necessarily a dependent arising that depends on its parts. And we could also say that if something exists as an established base, then it necessarily is merely designated, exists as merely designated as a only name. As only a name. So those levels, those are the second and third level of subtlety of dependent arising. So all phenomena actually are those two. So that includes the 12 links, but it's just a matter of the style of explanation. So when the 12 links were explained, right, by the Buddha, or when we explain them today, or when they're taught, when they're explained, it's easier. It's just an easier understanding. So as an introduction, as a way of giving an introductory explanation, it's easier to talk about them in terms of causal dependence. And so that's why it's done that way. And again, it's related again to the 4 levels of Buddhist philosophy, which are related to different people's capacities of understanding. And so the common, like universal way that's common to all Buddhist philosophies is to talk about the 12 links as causally dependent. And so, because all the Buddhist schools accept dependent arisings as causally dependent, that first level. However, it's only the Prasangika Madhyamika that would say that all three levels apply. So for Prasangika Madhyamika, if something is a thing, meaning an impermanent thing, then it's necessarily all three types of dependent arising, dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on parts, and dependent on being a name and designated. So the Prasangika accept all three of those, and then the Sautrantika, the autonomy middle way school, they also accept the first two. So they also accept that all phenomena are dependent on their parts. And so those are sort of higher schools, but then it's only the causal dependence which is accepted universally by all Buddhist schools. And so that's sort of just the style of explaining the 12 links as a universally applicable or approachable, acceptable to all Buddhist followers, and sort of whatever philosophical bent. And so right. So that is that's the answer. Yeah.
Thank you. You said this Svantrantika, I can never say that word, that it accepts only the first two, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's only the Prasangika who are able to make an explanation of and have an understanding of the third level of dependence on designation by conceptual mind.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop the class here for now.
Jere Siwan Tenzin Jazo Yin Shabi Sidi Ba Tenjuro Ji Kadin Duji Kamsu Chile Ju Topjo Dabi Lungdo Jez Leze Namla Rilaman Dermin De Lamduen Jebi Shi Sowan De Changju Simjo Rimbo Ji Maje Banama Jejuro Ji Jewa Nyamba Meba Koni kondo pewa sho tazin negin sewe minjin samu tenje tadang chawe de pajo lujo yabze gongwa chishi kondo chebe gyuro ngon gewa di gewo gu sonama ishi zozo sonama ishi lejun be tamba kuni Tobara sho. Thank you, Tujiche. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Geshe.
Thank you. Have a good night.